Rome's greatest generals were afraid of their own city, not of enemies, not of foreign armies, not of assassination plots or political rivals, of a gate, a specific gate in the city wall of Rome. The moment a victorious Roman general crossed it, something changed, something invisible but legally binding, something that Rome had built deliberately into the architecture of power to solve a problem that every republic faces eventually. The problem of the man who wins too much. The problem of the general who comes home. How does a republic survive its own heroes? To understand the terror of the city gate, you need to understand what a Roman general was when he was outside it. Outside Rome, a general with Imperium, the legal authority to command armies, was essentially a king. Not in title, in practice. He commanded life and death over tens of thousands of men. He made alliances, negotiated treaties, executed soldiers for cowardice, crucified enemies, distributed conquered wealth. His word was law. His judgment was final. There was no appeal above him. The word for this authority was Imperium, and it was real, total, and terrifying in its scope. But Imperium had a boundary, a precise, physical, geographical boundary. The pomerium. The pomerium was the sacred boundary of the city of Rome, not the city walls. The pomerium was older than the walls, a ritual line traced by Romulus himself according to Roman tradition, marked by boundary stones, invisible to the casual eye, but absolutely real in Roman law. Cross the pomerium, and your imperium ceased. Instantly, completely. The most powerful man in the Roman world became, the moment he stepped across that line, an ordinary citizen, subject to Roman law, accountable to Roman courts, stripped of his army, his authority, his legal protection. And in Rome, there were always people waiting. The system worked like this. A general returned from campaign. He had won. He had conquered. He had brought back slaves, gold, territory, glory. The Senate would vote him a triumph. The spectacular ceremonial procession through Rome that was the highest honor the Republic could bestow. The victory parade that the entire city turned out to watch. But before the triumph could happen, before he could ride his chariot through the cheering crowds with his face painted red to resemble Jupiter, he had to wait. Outside the city, in the area just beyond the pomerium. Sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, while the Senate debated. During that waiting period, he retained his imperium. His army remained under his command. He was still, legally, the most powerful man in the world. The moment he crossed into Rome to accept the triumph, it was over. He became a private citizen, and private citizens in Rome could be prosecuted. The prosecutions were real, vicious, politically motivated, and they happened with a consistency that every successful general understood was not accidental. Rome had a political culture in which the greatest threat to any senator's career was not an external enemy. It was a colleague who had become too successful, too popular, too powerful, a general who returned from campaign with a devoted army, enormous personal wealth from his share of the spoils, and the gratitude of a Roman public that had been celebrating his victories for years. That general was a political threat to every man in the Senate who had stayed home. The prosecution waiting for him inside the pomerium was not justice. It was politics, a mechanism for cutting down the tall poppy, for reminding the returning hero that in Rome, no one was above accountability, and that the men who had stayed home while he was winning wars had spent that time building the legal cases that would contain him when he returned. Scipio Africanus, the general who defeated Hannibal, who saved Rome from the most dangerous military threat it had ever faced, was prosecuted multiple times after his victories. His brother was convicted of financial irregularities from the Eastern campaigns. Scipio himself, disgusted by the ingratitude, retired to his country estate and left instructions that he not be buried in Rome. The city that owed him its survival was not, he felt, worthy of containing his remains. He died in voluntary exile. Camillus, the general credited with saving Rome after the Gallic sack of 390 BC, the man later generations called the second founder of Rome, was prosecuted and exiled before he achieved that salvation. He returned when Rome needed him, saved the city, and was celebrated. And then the political machinery turned on him again. The pattern was consistent. Win enough, and the city that celebrated you became the city that destroyed you. Think about what it actually felt like to be that general. Camped outside the city walls. Waiting. You have been away for years, possibly decades. You have slept in tents on the edges of known civilization. You have eaten campaign rations and drunk bad water and watched men die for years on end. You have made decisions that cost thousands of lives and live with that weight every day. You have won, completely. The enemy is defeated. The province is pacified. The gold is in the supply wagons. The slaves are in the column behind you, and you are sitting outside your own city, unable to go home. Because the moment you go home, the men who never left their comfortable houses, who ate well and slept in beds and attended dinner parties while you were bleeding in foreign fields, those men will use the legal machinery of the Republic to destroy you. You can see the city from here. You can probably see the smoke from the hearths of your own house. You cannot cross the line. And because you are not naive, because you have spent years studying human nature in its most concentrated form on campaign, but the trial waiting for you inside is not really about the specific charge they will bring. It is about the fact that you became too powerful, and they need to cut you down before that power becomes something that threatens the system that you just bled for. The specific injustice of this, the particular bitterness of being prosecuted by men your victories protected, is something that the Roman sources return to again and again, not as abstract injustice, as a felt, personal, gnawing reality that the most successful men in Roman history had to manage every day they sat outside those walls. Some managed it with philosophical resignation. Marcus Furius Camillus accepted exile with apparent dignity. Some managed it with political maneuvering, building alliances inside the city during the waiting period, preparing their legal defense before they crossed the line, arriving inside the pomerium with enough political support to survive the prosecutions. And some didn't manage it at all. The stakes of getting it wrong were not abstract. Exile was the best outcome for a prosecution that went badly. Real exile, not a country estate. Departure from Rome, from Italy, from everything you had built and everyone you knew, to live out the rest of your life in a foreign city, dependent on the hospitality of people who would always know you as the great Roman general who had been driven from his own country. The alternative was worse. Conviction on charges of treason or corruption could mean execution, could mean the confiscation of everything you owned, leaving your family destitute, could mean the systematic destruction of your reputation, the damnatio memoriae, the formal erasure of your name from public record. That was the most complete form of destruction Rome could inflict on a man, because it meant not just killing him, but killing the memory of him. In a culture where reputation and legacy were among the most valuable things a man could possess, where dying remembered was considered more important than dying comfortable, the threat of erasure was existential in a way that the physical threats of campaign were not. You could die on campaign. That was honorable. Your name would be remembered. You could be prosecuted and erased. Your name would be removed from the monuments. Your victories attributed to others. Your existence effectively unmade by the political machinery of the city you had served. That was the terror at the gate. Not death. Disappearance. Compare this to how other ancient states handled the same problem. What do you do with successful generals? Athens had ostracism, a formal vote in which citizens could exile any person they considered too powerful or too dangerous, without charges, without trial, without specific accusations. Just a collective decision that this person was becoming a threat to the democratic order. Themistocles, the architect of the victory at Salamis, was ostracized. The man who saved Greek civilization was voted out of the city by the people whose civilization he had saved. Sparta had a different approach. Sparta's dual kingship and powerful efforts created enough institutional checks on military commanders that individual generals rarely accumulated the kind of personal power that required systematic neutrality. The system prevented the problem from arising rather than solving it after the fact. Persia simply executed commanders who failed and rewarded those who succeeded, with no particular institutional mechanism for containing success. which is partly why successful Persian commanders occasionally became the cores of provincial power that threatened central authority. Rome's system, the pomerium, the Imperium boundary, the waiting period, the prosecution culture, was the most sophisticated attempt in the ancient world to solve the fundamental republican problem of military power. It was not kind. It was not just in the individual cases where it destroyed men who deserved better, but it was effective. For centuries, Rome managed to produce extraordinary military commanders, men who conquered the known world, without any of them being able to convert that military success into permanent personal power inside the Republic. Until one of them figured out that the solution to the problem of the gate was not to manage the politics waiting inside. The solution was to arrive with your army still behind you. Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon in 49 BC was not a spontaneous act of defiance. It was the endpoint of a calculation that every successful Roman general had been making since the Republic began. The calculation that the system designed to protect Rome from its generals could only be beaten by doing the one thing the system was designed to prevent: bring the army across the pomerium. Caesar understood the terror of the city gate because he had lived inside the system long enough to understand its logic completely. He knew what waited for him inside Rome if he crossed the pomerium as a private citizen. The prosecutions were already prepared. His enemies had been building the cases for years. He had a choice: cross as a citizen and be destroyed, or cross as a commander and destroy the Republic. He chose, and in that choice, forced by a system that gave its most successful general no survivable legal option, the Republic that the system was designed to protect ceased to exist. Rome's mechanism for containing its generals ultimately produced the general who could not be contained. The gate that was supposed to protect Rome became the moment Rome ended. Here is the question that Rome's city gate leaves you with. Every system designed to contain power eventually faces the person who understands its system completely, who has lived inside it long enough to see exactly how it works, exactly where its edges are, exactly what it does to people who try to operate within it. It makes the calculation that the system itself is the problem. Rome's answer to military power was legal containment. Brilliant, sophisticated, effective for centuries, and ultimately self-defeating. Because the more effective the containment, the more clearly it communicated to the most capable men in the system that the system was not neutral, that it was a weapon pointed at them specifically, that playing by the rules was a path to destruction. Think about the systems you operate inside, the institutions, the organizations, the professional structures that contain and direct your capabilities. Are they designed to produce the best possible outcomes? Or are they designed to prevent the worst possible outcomes from the people at the top, who are most afraid of the people below them? Caesar didn't break Rome. Rome built the conditions that made Caesar inevitable. The question is not whether those conditions produce a Caesar. They always do. The question is whether you see it coming, and what you do about it before the army reaches the gate. In the next video, we go inside the triumph itself, the ceremony that waited on the other side of the pomerium. The spectacular, strange, psychologically precise ritual that Rome used to simultaneously celebrate its generals and remind them, and everyone watching, of their place. There was a man who stood behind the triumphant general in his chariot. His entire job was to whisper one sentence, over and over, for the entire length of the procession. One sentence, repeated for hours. And what that sentence was, and why Rome considered it the most important single act of the entire ceremony, will tell you everything about how the most powerful empire in the ancient world thought about the relationship between glory and power. That video is coming, and it starts with the most uncomfortable truth Rome ever had to admit about itself.